The Apple III project was started in early 1979. At this time, the Lisa project was already underway and had been for a number of months. One of the primary motivations of doing the Apple III was our concerns with FCC Part 15. At that time, FCC Part 15 was applied to games, typically the Atari games, for example, and the radiation specifications were very tight, and the concern was that these same specifications would be applied to the Apple II as a PC, and there was a concern that it would be very difficult to meet those specifications without development of an entirely new sealed-up case to do that. So that was one of the motivations. The other was just a concern that Apple needs to come out with a new product, that maybe the Apple II was getting stale. Obviously, that certainly did not prove to be true. But it was also intended that while they were building it, it might as well make it more business-oriented. And this became Project Sarah, which was named after my daughter. The initial hardware engineers were myself and Dan Kotke. Dan did all of the lab work for this. And the software development, SOS software, Sarah operating system it was called at the time, was Dick Houston, Bob Etheridge, and Tom Root. A little later on in hardware, Walt Brodner and John McDougall came on board. The layout work was done by Colette Askeland, who later did the Macintosh layout. The industrial design was Dean Covey and David Kelly, obviously with input from Steve, and with Rod Holt providing input for the EMI, since he had done that kind of work at Atari before. The product was announced in May of 1980, just 18 months after the initiation of the project. It was announced at a computer conference in Anaheim, complete with the demonstrations of the hardware and the software, which is very fast. Delivery started then in November of 1980. There was really just not enough time given for testing. There seemed to be a lot of pressure to get this into the marketplace as quickly as possible. So this then led to, of course, some of the later issues that we saw on the system. The operating system development was really very fast. That was an excellent timeline. The main hardware features were lowercase, since the Apple II did not have lowercase, 80-column capability. It had outputs capable of generating RGB outputs and interfacing with RGB type of monitors. And it had later the ability optionally to interlace the display. There was also, of course, the expanded memory, allowing memory size up to 256K with 18-bit zero-page addressing, which was achieved by monitoring the opcodes of the 6502 and providing additional bits on zero-page references. It had a built-in serial board card, or built-in serial port. It had a slow scroll kind of thing, which was, I'm not sure it was ever very useful, but I'd been fascinated by seeing some displays on other machines where they slowly scroll the text up, and that was the source of that feature. It had a DMA capability, a special kind of DMA capability that permitted 256-byte block transfers between peripherals and the main memory board at a rate of 1 byte per clock cycle, so that it would move 256 bytes and 256 clocks. And of course, it had a lot of EMI shielding. The deficiencies were, in my opinion, the crippled Apple II mode. The idea was that people were concerned that the the people would not adopt the new operating system if it had too good of an Apple II mode, which was, turns out, I think, to have been a very bad idea. There were, of course, a couple of well-known hardware problems. One of them that's not quite so public was that we had designed in a national MOS clock chip, which was pulled by National Semiconductor literally days before the release of the product for reliability issues. In those days, MOS chips often had contamination problems, which caused them to be unreliable, and their analysis teams determined that the process being used for this clock chip was inherently unreliable, and they had to cancel all the chips on that line. Of course, the other one, well known as the unreliable, was the intermittent failures, which was caused by an unreliable memory board connector. The memory board was writing inside the enclosure on these posts, on the Molex posts, and the Molex connectors they used were a single wipe without enough pressure. And the problem was that the oxide could build up in the contacts. There was enough current flow to create contact failure on those. And of course, the easy way to re-wipe the connectors was to jolt the board, which would cause the memory board, which is a pretty good sized mass, to move on the posts and create a new wipe and fix the problem. George Adams found a connector intended for the appliance market, which fit exactly into the same outlines and provided a double wipe with heavy force, which was absolutely requirable. We had I think about 40 to 50 systems running in a room, which were running continuously to try to determine what was going on. And they would, of course, intermittently fail. And as soon as we replaced the memory boards, they all became totally reliable. So that was clearly the problem. It was not anything to do with the sockets. There were not dual inline packages crawling out of their sockets. There was really not a whole overheating problem. Nothing ever changed when in the later versions of these boards, and then nothing had been changed about the system at all. What Apple did is they did a hardware correction to fix this problem and replaced the 14,000 logic boards that had already been shipped. And they were replaced with 5-volt memory boards with reliable connectors. The main logic board had too many jumper wires on it, which itself was not a reliability problem unless they were handled. They were subject to damage and handling, and it was considered to be too much of a risk. At the time of the replacement, in addition to the 5-volt memory boards, they provided an ability to put a switch in for interlace. To my knowledge, to be very honest, I have not seen, since the replacement, I have not seen an original board. I had one for a while, but unfortunately I didn't hang on to it. I really should have. I really have never even seen a photograph of one of the original boards. If someone has one, I'd be interested in knowing. I think Apple really learned a message out of this, that take a little more time and make sure that you got some reliability testing done in this. And that was really the takeaway. And so that was really the end of my experience with the Apple III project, although later on, a few years later, I helped On3 approached me about doing a 512K modification. And so I worked with them on the 512K board, and which required some rewiring on the main logic board and replacement of at least one or two of the proms. The Apple III had used proms for random logic as opposed to PALs, which may have been able to do the same thing for many of the functions, but PALs were just coming onto the market and were really not available in a practical sense to use in the Apple III. And that was one thing that was made life easier on the Macintosh, was the availability of the PAL. And that's really my story on the Apple III. Thank you.
So Dave Ottalini is going to run the discussion, and we'll talk with him tomorrow more about his own work.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Sander, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see you and to hear you after all these years. I don't know if you remember me, but back when you were at the engineering department, I came and visited you, and we did an interview, and there's that famous picture of you with the Apple III that seems to get splashed all around the place. But it's such a pleasure to see you and talk to you today. So thank you so much for making time here with KansasFest and this special emphasis or focus on the Apple III. And so I'm just gonna I'll start off asking a few questions. If other folks have questions, they can put that in the chat box, and we'll pass those along as well, if that's okay with you, sir.
Yeah, I would start out by saying my memory is not what it used to be. So
I can't understand that.
A disclaimer right up front.
You're fine. After hearing your presentation, I think you're doing just fine. But I guess so. You were Apple employee number 16. Did Steve approach you to work on the Apple III, the Sarah project, or how did you first know that you were going to be involved with that?
Well, it was really it was kind of funny. Then they were thinking about doing the project. There were a couple of people I think they were thinking about, but I'd been involved in, of course, in the Apple II Rev conversion to Rev 1, and had worked on a lot of the early Apple II peripheral boards too. And I'd been involved in almost all of the really early ones. And I'd actually, and so I did. It was really Mike Scott who approached me, and they asked me to be the lead on it. So it was more. I was Markla and Scott, and Steve, of course, was involved some then. But at that time, Markla and Scott did a little more of the management. Also, our Tom Whitney was our VP of engineering at that time too. And I mean, I'd gone to college with him. He and I were classmates in graduate school.
Gotcha. How much of a marching orders or even oversight did Steve provide as you started working on that project?
Really, not much. Primarily, it was around, as you would expect, the styling, as the physical styling of the case and the appearance. But in terms of content, Steve had a tendency to always be interested in the next project. And to him, the Apple II and Apple III were the old technology. So he was more interested in the new technology, meaning at that time, Lisa, because Lisa was active before even the Apple III. And he was heavily involved in the details of that project, but then pulled off and really did the Macintosh. Uh-huh. But I would say his input was very, very small in terms of anything to do with functionality of the Apple III.
But he didn't make the determination that it shouldn't have full Apple II capability.
No, that was not him at all. That, I think, was a combination of marketing, and one of the people on the operating system, Tom Root, tended to have very strong feelings that that he was very worried that it was going to cause a problem, that the new operating system may not become adopted if the old one was too good.
That's
well, it's remember this. There really nobody had made a transition of generations, so nobody quite had an understanding of how legacy software worked.
Yeah. Right. Was there a thought given to separating out the keyboard from the main CPU, or did you just follow through with, because of the Apple II obviously was an all-in-one with the keyboard?
Well, it is better for EMI to have it together because you could box it all up. That was the motivator, to be very honest.
I mean, it was interesting to me that my understanding was that the case itself was, I guess it was because of the EMI problems, but you actually had to manufacture it in at a facility that made engine blocks and that kind of thing.
I don't remember, but I believe it. It was a major aluminum casting. It was cast aluminum is what it was.
Yeah.
It turned out that the actual EMI standards required for PCs was made less stringent than we were concerned about. They loosened it up for the purpose of the PCs versus the games at that time. And actually, we had people who were working with the FCC to help try to develop those standards. So that was the FCC was in contact with the PC community and that work.
Interesting. And were you involved at all with when they decided to? Were you move on to the Apple III Plus? Were you involved in that at all?
No, I was not. I was. In the early 1980s, I really went into more of a consulting mode. I did do some work on the 2GS in terms of I worked with what's his name in Phoenix. My mind slips, but the developer of the 65A16. I was involved with him, and we did work together some on development of that.
One of the questions that fits in with what we're talking about is, was there any CAD or chips design software available at the time? Could you give us an overview of the design and build process?
Of the chips themselves?
I guess the chips, or even the CPU, whatever.
Well, the motherboard. The 650, the Apple III did not have any custom chips as such in it. Of course, the 2E was the first system that really had custom chips. The 3, what as I mentioned, we used a lot of PROMs and ROMs because that was one way to get a more effective logic and less space. But PALs would have been a lot better if we'd have had them. Other than that, it was really the 6502 was the same 6502. To do some of the memory extensions, all I did was use they have 6502 has a signal called a sync that comes out on every time an opcode is fetched. So you would be able, since you could do that, then you could capture the opcode being fetched and determine. And I was able to detect the 0-page references, and that allowed me then to essentially expand the 0-page memory so that all memory fetches to 0 pages could be expanded out. You could have gone on another 8 bits, actually.
The Sarah operating system, I guess later called sophisticated operating system.
Yeah, right.
You weren't involved in the writing of that.
No, I was not. By that point, I was really purely in hardware. Now, in the Apple II days, I on the peripherals, I actually did quite a bit of the software for the peripherals themselves. So in fact, the serial card, not the serial card, but the COM card software, Andy Hertzfeld once said that was the tightest code he ever saw. So that was my code in there. But after that, I kind of got away from it. I never was great at the operating system software kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And so I that I wasn't familiar with.
I know when we talk about the operating system and it's Apple took SOS and turned it into ProDOS.
Yes, that was Dick Houston.
But it seems to me too that there was some discussion about how the impact of SOS and ProDOS had even on the Mac OS, just because of the hierarchical file system and all of that stuff, how they really helped lay the foundation for the newer OSs that the Mac used when it first came out.
Yeah. But it's interesting that that was much of that was Dick Houston's work. And Dick was an interesting guy. He was sort of a self-taught. He was not a computer science major. He was a self-taught amateur, basically.
Really,
really, really good.
Well, one of our folks that you were listening today said that they recently got a 3, and they fired it up, and then it started right up, and which is a testament to the resilience and the quality of the 3 Plus design, I'm sure. But I know that whenever we worked on 3s, it wasn't the 5-inch drop was one thing, but first thing we always did was when we opened it up was we always took our thumb and pushed down every single tip, and you could hear those things go crackle, crackle, crackle.
But those same sockets were in use on every Apple II at the time too. They didn't need to be dropped. It's kind of interesting, but the Apple IIIs, once we fixed that problem, because it kind of went the other way, they were extremely reliable. And actually at Apple III was very quickly became the dominant computer in use in Apple for about 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
It wasn't until the Macintosh got to the stages where they had peripheral boards and things like that, got to the Mac II level and later that they started phasing out the Apple III for usage inside. I mean, so it was used extensively inside Apple for many years.
One of the questions is, at least in the Apple II mode, why it only output was black and white versus the RGB. Was that by design or you remember?
I'm not sure actually why the RGB didn't. I did make an improvement in the NTSC version. I improved the old color bars on the Apple II tend to have pretty big gaps in them when you try to make them. And the Apple III, an interesting thing to do is to take an old Apple II color bars program and run it on an Apple II and an Apple III, and you'll see a significant improvement. Not that anybody ever noticed, but they will.
When the 3 came out, it was pretty expensive. I mean, comparative, although I think Paul or somebody said that the Apple III that you would purchase the price was about the same as an Apple II if you bought all the peripherals and everything else.
Yeah.
But any thoughts about why the 3 couldn't compete with the PC, the IBM PC?
Well, I think the IBM PC had the huge advantage that as the business computer, that is, if you were in the business side of things, there was always this feeling that IBM always won because the guy the purchase manager who buys a new computer, if it's not an IBM, it would say, well, it's not an IBM. But if they bought an IBM, they said, well, you did the best you could. And there was actually a really, really strong bias toward IBM in the business community. And they just didn't believe a PC existed until IBM had one.
That's because I don't think, the Microsoft operating system was not all that good, really.
well, it wasn't, and it but I think that, like I say, the reason was that IBM, that the business community, the business was aimed in the direction they really were waiting for IBM to make a PC, and that's what they were going to adopt. It was just that they just had such a hold on the market. It's what's ironic now is IBM no longer makes PCs, of course. Yeah. So who won?
Well, and Microsoft uses Macs, right? I mean, so that's how crazy is that? One of our viewers is asking about Woz. Was Steve Wozniak involved at all with the three?
Well, not directly. No, he was aware of what was going on, and we talked about it. But Woz had been kind of got out of after the a disk drive, which was his last major contribution to the industry. That was significant. Once after that, he got distracted because he was pretty well off and everything. But the other thing is, I think he just got distracted. He was the type of person who and he showed it on the disk drive, who could do these just insanely complicated things and focus. But he had to totally focus to make that work, and that's why they worked, is because he just got lost in it totally. Nothing else mattered. He's just really was a great engineer that way. And after that, he just never got anything that he focused that much on that I saw at Apple anyway. And he had gone off and was starting other things and getting converted, getting sidetracked. Right. To be very honest.
Was there any specific things that you wanted to implement into the three that was turned down because of time or cost issues?
I can't think of anything, and quite honestly, I don't think I ever proposed anything else. I had pretty free reign on that. I was able to put in almost any idea I wanted to, and I tried a few that were kind of, in retrospect, kind of oddball, but I put them in because I thought they were a good idea.
Well, my thing is that at that time, I don't think there was anything that you could, oddball ideas were good because I think at that point, because who knew? We didn't.
Yeah, that's trailblazers. What was going to click?
Yeah, I don't think people. Computers were still expensive enough that not every, you didn't have one in every home, and not even in every school necessarily at that point in time. Could you tell us a little bit? After you left Apple, you went to a company called the engineering department, if I remember right.
Yes.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects and things that you worked on there?
Well, we did the PC transporter design that was sold by Applied Engineering. We designed that. That was done, and we sort of sold that to them on a contractual basis.
Uh-huh.
Of course, that company included Dick Houston and Cliff Houston and Bob Lashley. And myself were the company primarily. But I think actually one of the most interesting projects we did was we actually designed for Apple. I had done the original prototype of the language card back in the beginning, and there's a story to that. I did that. They were working on doing a language card kind of thing, and Bill Adkison was working on trying to do the development, and so he was trying to develop these other languages, and he was using EPROMs, and he was continually having to reburn EPROMs, and I wanted to get a copy of his software, so I thought about it and I said, well, I don't want to pay for all those EEPROMs. I'm just going to use RAM. So I made the RAM card. And I took it in and I showed it to him, to Bill. And he took one look at it and says, oh, I need that. And he grabbed he grabbed the board and I never saw it again. That was the beginning of the RAM card. But what was interesting was, and so then Bob Paratori took it and finished it off, did the final work on it. But what is interesting, and when I was at the engineering department, they came back to us, and after they had the 2E, they were selling 2Es to schools, and they had trade-in programs, so you could trade in the old Apple II for 2Es as a part of your down payment, right? So they ended up with all of these old Apple IIs. And what they wanted to do was decided they were going to donate these to third world countries as computers to spread computing in other countries and might make them apples,
Sure.
So they were going to do that, but what they needed a disk drive to go with it, of course, but they needed a language card. So they needed language cards, and at the time, 16K DRAMs were getting too expensive. So they came to us and had us design a RAM card, a real RAM card. Didn't have a how to start ROM or anything on it. They just needed the memory. So, but it was an SRAM card. So it was static RAM, just a small card that you plugged in, and it was a language card. And we made maybe as much as 1,000 of those for Apple. But what was interesting was they had an Apple computer label on them and a engineering department label on them. So first of all, it's probably one of the rarest Apple II cards with an Apple label that you'll ever find, because where are you going to find one? And the other thing interesting about it is I don't know of any other case where they put the manufacturer's label on the same card with the Apple logo. So that was interesting.
It was interesting. And I guess the software was able to be.
The software didn't matter. It responded just like a language card. It was a copy of the language card. So it just plug it in and it worked.
Somebody's asking, we'll take a step back here, about how did you get hired by Apple? How old were you at the time? And I know you went to college because you mentioned that, but what previous experience did you have before you ended up at Apple?
Well, I was at, I got a bachelor's degree in 1956 in electrical engineering. I worked in Southern California for 4 years in the aerospace industry. Then I went back to graduate school and I got a PhD in 1963. And I joined Fairchild Research and Development Labs in Palo Alto in 1964. And I worked there. I did a lot of the development I did memory chip design. I did some of the first practical memory chips that were available, and did some work on early large-scale integration. And I was there for 13 years. So I was at Fairchild R&D Labs for 13 years, and I ended up as I was a department head there, working for Jim Early and developing a bipolar DRAM. So we were developing a bipolar DRAM. I had a department with my own process line and everything there. And actually, Gil Emilio was one of the other department heads there. Interesting.
Oh, is that right? Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
So I was a department head, and we had these DRAMs that I would develop. And I wanted to see them operate in a real computer. So I was looking at the byte shops, and they had an Apple I that used DRAMs. And I knew my DRAMs were close enough. I knew I could make them work. So I bought an Apple I and put 16K or I guess it'd be 4 rows. I put 4 rows of those of the 4K DRAMs of mine, of bipolar, and on the Apple One, and you was using it, and I had 4 teenage boys at that time at home, so I was writing games, obviously. So I had written a Star Trek game, adapted one for it, and Steve Jobs heard about it, and he wanted to see a demo, so I gave him my son and I took it over and demoed it to Steve Jobs, and that's how. Because I'd met Steve, because if you bought an Apple One, you if you wanted, you got the software updates from Steve. Because I mean, when I first got the Apple One, the basic didn't even have an input statement in it yet. So,
Well, they were making those in their garage, right? Were they still manufacturing them there?
Yeah, but they were. Well, they had developed them and made them, and then they had this deal with Paul Terrell, who came in and said, "Well, I'd like to sell some of those. I'd like to get some to sell." And they'd sell them 50 of them, and he said, "But I need them assembled." So that's when they started to business making things, and they built 50 of them for the bite shops. And I bought one from a bite shop in San Jose.
Gotcha. One of the other questions, and it's a good one, is the ongoing hatred, I guess, by Steve Jobs of fans in computers. Did he direct that there would be no fan in there, or was there just?
Well, he didn't want a fan in there, that's for sure. And fortunately, the massive structure, that massive cast iron block, was a really good heat sink and transferred heat out of it very nicely. But it weighed a ton, but it worked.
It did work. There was actually, if I remember correct, there was a third party who actually did come out with a fan that you would kind of screw into the back of those fins, in the back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you could use it for that. But I mean, I had a 3 for many, many years, and I never had a heat problem with it at all. It was not the problem, with it.
Yeah, it wasn't a real problem. Yeah, they made fans for the Apple II too, of course. You could get those and bolt them in.
But were you surprised? I mean, Apple decided to discontinue the 3 in in 83, I guess, early 83, just a few months after the Plus came out. But somebody had alluded to the fact that maybe it was an EMI issue, but I just don't think that it was.
No, it was strictly economics. Well, I think that the 2E coming out was it was clear that was a sales winner, and so the volume wasn't there. They felt they'd be better off focusing on there was a little bit of a problem with proliferation of too many projects at times too, and so they wanted to cut back projects, and that was one that they felt that wasn't paying its way, and that they could do better by focusing those engineers on other projects.
I mean, those are issues that they had later on, and later on too. So I mean,
they sure did.
Didn't learn their lesson, did they?
Yeah, it didn't.
Oh, crazy. I had a 3. Well, into the early 90s, I think I used it until I finally switched. I mean, I ended up going. I had a 2GS. And then finally the Mac. But when I bought my first 3 in 83, right at the point where it was being discontinued. But the Mac was out at that point, and I tell people, when I went into the computer store in Washington D.C. to buy one, and I could buy an Apple III or like a Mac SE, maybe even earlier one than that, for the same price, And I bought the 3 because that's what I had learned on to start with. But got so much use out of it, and I wonder if you were surprised at, we called it the machine that would not die.
Yeah,
it just
and quite honestly, they had the same experience at Apple until they got to the little higher end Macs. there was I think I was in their company store. It was well into the late 80s, and they were still running the company store on an Apple III. Now I don't know. So they those things. There were a lot of people. It was a long time before, because it was, if you get an Apple III and a Cume printer, you were really pretty good business.
Well, it was dependable, right? Right, and the software, I mean, because VisiCalc and you could, you could network it. I mean, it was not cheap to do that, but you could do that, and but it was it once they moved to the Apple III Plus and had fixed some of those small issues, the issues, the machine would just work. It just worked.
Yeah, and quite honestly, once they put out once they did the board replacement and got those replacements out there just were not any reliability problems left. The 3 Plus, the big advantage was they were able to get the board struck down and clean it up a little bit. But fundamentally, there were not many circuit changes to it, or if any. It was virtually the same machine. It just was a lot cleaner inside.
I'll finish because our time is running out here. But
okay,
if that's all right with you,
that's fine with me.
Have you been surprised though? At just the longevity of it and how we'll hear from Bob Consorti a little bit later. But this community of the three is pretty amazing, and just the new. Actually, there's a new these newer folks who have come in, the new hobbyists who have designed all kinds of things like the CF card, and there's some other things that we would never have imagined. But did that surprise you?
Yeah, it does surprise me, because there were not as many of them built. It was a little bit more of a niche kind of computer, but it seems very popular. I mean, I have people who want me to sign their computer, and so I've done a few of those, and that kind of surprises me.
Well, I want to thank you so much for making the time, and it's such an honor to talk with you again.
Well, it was nice to talk with you again too.
And good luck to you, sir. And I'm going to turn it back over to Paul.
Okay.
Yes, we would echo that sentiment. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.